Paul, I'm really happy to be at this conference with you on the quest for consonance and theology and the natural sciences. I'd like there to be consonance, but frankly, consonance is something that to me sometimes worries me, because it may mean that we're artificially trying to yoke two uneven things together. So I want to be skeptical about what consonance is and how you achieve it. This is something you focused on in various aspects of your theological work, and I'd like to understand your understanding of consonance, and then maybe see how robust it is.
Right. So what happens in terms of my discovery of the term consonance, and it was a term that I discovered in the work of Ernan McMullen. And what that discovery meant was, for me anyway, it was an insight into the need that theology or theologians have to not engage with the sciences directly and just borrow willy-nilly, but actually to use philosophy to be like traffic, monitoring the traffic back and forth. So for me, it was very clearly, it was tied up with the insight that theology needs philosophy, and that's not necessarily a popular view, especially in certain Christian churches, for which philosophy is a kind of a sideline. It's not really important. It doesn't tell you how to read the Bible. Actually, hermeneutics, the science of interpreting the Bible is very philosophical, but that's another issue. So consonance between theology and the science means you use philosophy, and you do it intentionally. You pay attention to what is the human person who's at once a scientist and also a believer in God.
So if I can paraphrase it, see if I'm right, is that you're saying that if you're going to achieve consonance between science and theology, the theology part has to use the science in a way that makes deep sense, and you can't just do it directly by looking at data from the sciences and cosmology or evolution or whatever you want and seeing how it corresponds. You have to have a very detailed philosophical approach, the ways of thinking of philosophy, in order to discern how that works together.
Exactly. So a philosophical approach also means that you can't be just selective about the science that you like and leave out the science you don't like.
Sure.
I mean, if you do, at least you have to be very explicit as to why you're doing that. What method are you following in order to select some things and leave out other things as to your account, and say, what are the criteria? So for example, studying consciousness. Obviously, theology has a stake in the idea that we are not merely material beings. Right? So that has an impact on all of the studies around consciousness, right? Neuroscience. So what does that mean? It means that theology or theologians look as widely as possible at all of the sort of the studies of consciousness, and don't just select the studies of consciousness that appeal to you, like that for example, have an understanding that the brain is spiritual or some such thing. You actually look at the neuroscientists who have critiqued other neuroscientists and used an internal critique as to what goes on in consciousness studies as to why materialism is false. So don't say materialism is false for theological reasons. The responsible theologian uses philosophy and the science itself in order to dig at what's the problem with the materialist view of the human person, just to use that example.
You've talked about a renewal of natural theology. Natural theology, by its definition, seeks some kind of consonance between science and religion. In fact, natural theology, in a sense, is a mechanism to look at the world to see if you can infer the existence of God from the natural world,
right?
Not miracles or anything, but from the natural world,
right.
And you've and that, of course, was great in history, and then after Darwin fell on, and then recently in cosmology and physics, some people have brought it back. And you've talked about this renewal of natural theology. Is that part of this consonance process?
Yeah, I think so. I think what I want to do, and this is something that I've just been working on more recently, but what I would like to do is take the conversation a little bit beyond the more recent discussions of cosmology and anthropic principle and those kinds of things, to one in which we really take a closer look at human desire. So on my thinking of it, it is, so a part of the natural world is the human creature, the human person. And human persons have a need for the desire to make meaning of their lives, have a desire for the truth, a desire for goodness, and a desire for love. This is part and parcel of what it means to be a human. Well, a lot of that, a great deal of that, arises naturally in all human cultures. You can, I think, make a number of claims about how human beings in all cultures have these different kinds of natural desires. So, from my point of view, that is enough material to work with as a basis for constructing a natural theology. It's not meant to replace, but rather to complement the sort of the modern natural theology that starts from interpretations of biology or cosmology.
And so trace what you actually do. If you analyze in depth this desire, and you can show that in animals as well as humans, different characteristics, how then do you, after you analyze it, how then do you make the step or the leap?
Yeah. Is it the leap to faith? That's a key thing, because in this one project I've worked on, there's two paradigmatic ways of thinking about how to do natural theology. There's the medieval way, and it's mostly associated with Thomas Aquinas, because Thomas Aquinas has these famous 5 proofs for the existence of God that start his Summa Theologiae. Now, so just a word about the medieval or the Thomas Aquinas way is that whole construction of proofs for the existence of God is actually meant as a preamble to faith, right? So faith becomes not then a leap, but faith has I wouldn't say it's not logically entailed by the proofs for the existence of God, but there's a lead-in as to why faith would be a sensible thing to have. So that's the medieval model for doing natural theology. The other model comes from the early modern period. So figures like William Durham, William Paley, folks like that, mostly 18th century, pre-Darwinian scientists who were pastors, ministers, priests, or priests, ministers who were also philosophers of nature. That model, that way of thinking of natural theology has a different understanding of natural theology. That understanding of natural theology sees the world and an understanding of the world as part of God's order as actually a kind of replacement for Christian doctrine. See, whereas Thomas Aquinas thought of natural theology as the preamble to Christian doctrine, to faith, this view, the early modern view of natural theology, sort of changes it up rather dramatically, so that Christian doctrine falls into the shadow, and this natural knowledge of the world as testimony to God's existence and even the attributes of God comes forward. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to fit a natural theology that's more in line with the medieval view rather than the early modern view. So I think that you can construct a natural theology that's oriented to the medieval view, but also begins with, or at least examines, the various component parts of the natural human desires that we have.
So you're using desire and then analyzing it through this medieval approach to natural theology,
Right.
which starts with these general rules or ways of thinking about God, but applying that specifically to desire,
Right, exactly.
as an expression to see if you can infer.
Right, and not just good desires.
Just the capacity to desire.
Yeah, and the capacity to, in analyzing ourselves or in understanding ourselves, the Christian doctrine of sin, for example, has this long history as to what sin is, an infraction or a disobedience against God. Sin, in this understanding of a natural theology of desire, it has to relate to the human sense of our own wrongdoings. And that's very important.
So how are you doing? You're getting to God through natural theology of desire?
Yeah, I think so, because basically I pick up on what C.S. Lewis said, which is that there is this God-shaped hole in every human heart. So I'm working with that basic idea.